just get comfortable with it. You don't even have to have arrows that are tuned. Obviously, that'll help. But start out, man, just get comfortable shooting a bow. Have fun. Get it in the summertime, springtime, and just shoot it. Shoot it in your yard. Shoot it, at leaves. Shoot it at the target, and just get comfortable. Once you get comfortable and you kind of go through the motions, that's when you start looking at the details where you're going to get your bow tuned. People think it's completely different from a compound, but the mechanics are the same. So you still have to have an anchor point. You still follow through. You still have to have form. And people get caught up. They think it's snap shooting. No, that's not the case. Some people shoot that way, but I actually will hold my bow 5 to 8 seconds sometimes. Like I'll hold my bow almost as long as what I would with a compound.
Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast, episode number 274. Harmon Carson, Bow Hunting Big West and the Bayou. Support for the Big Buck Registry and the Deer Hunt Podcast comes from Rackology. Everything you need in one bag. Now available at Rural King and Orslyn Farm and Home storefronts. Or online at www.rackology.org. -33 merino wool layering system. Timeless natural insulation, keeping you warm on the coldest days while staying breathable and wicking away moisture on the wet ones without the old school itch of regular wool. Grizzly Ears, the most advanced engineered wireless earbuds for the outdoors. Covert scouting cameras, remote cameras for hunting, wildlife, and security. Quiet Cat, the all-terrain electric bicycle. Visit quietcat.com. That's QUIETKAT.com and use the discount code BIGBUCK15 to secure 15% off your next Quiet Cat purchase. And Big Buck merch. You can get cool, high-quality Big Buck t-shirts, long-sleeve t-shirts, and hoodies. And show support for this podcast by visiting www.bigbuckregistry.com/MERCH. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
This is Brandon Adams with Major League Bowhunter, and you are about to listen to the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hey, this is JC Hall from On the Road and Open Season TV, and you're listening to one of my favorite podcasts, the Big Buck Registry.
Hey guys, this is Seth Perkins from Bearded Butcher Blend Seasoning, and you're listening to one of my favorite podcasts, Big Buck Registry.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow predators. My name is Jay, and thank you for tuning in to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. For Dusty Phillips and Jim Keller and the entire staff here at the Big Buck Registry, welcome to this week's show. There are a couple things I'd like you to do for us if you could. If you would, please check us out on iTunes, subscribe, and leave us a review. With your help, we're going to try and push this show up the iTunes charts. I know we have a lot of listeners out there, and I need you to take some action. I need you to leave a review and subscribe to this show. If you do subscribe, that'll give you access and notification each and every week that a new show is released. You can also access this show in its entirety on YouTube, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play, and as an Amazon Alexa skill. Go to Alexa and say, Alexa, enable Big Buck Registry. It's all right there for you to access on demand at your fingertips. Regarding the harness program, we have an ample supply of harnesses to give away from our volunteer donors. If you're in need of a full-body harness, please send an email to j@bigbuckregistry.com. Although Harmon Carson is known as the Bayou Bowhunter, he sharpened his bow hunting skills in the mountains of Colorado. Harmon credits his dad for lots of his skills, but not necessarily in the traditional father-son teaching sense. In many cases, Harmon learned to hunt because his father would escort him into the woods, but then he was on his own to learn the rest, methods that might not fly today. Nonetheless, those lessons made Harmon one heck of a good bow hunter. No more gun, no more compound, just straight-up traditional bow hunting. Harmon says, learn to hunt first, and the weapon you choose becomes irrelevant. We'll get to our entire interview with Harmon Carson in just one moment, but before we do, let's hear from our friends at Rackology, -33 Merino Wool Products, and Jim Keller with the Deer News.
Hey, it's Eric Fitzgerald here with Rackology. Wanted to visit you briefly about one of the most exciting products that we got in the market with Rackology. This is our food plot fertilizer. You can supplement your deer right through your food plot with this product. This is not your normal NPK. This has got so many goodies in this bag. Basically what it does is it makes your soil work for you so you can get by with just using fertilizer like this and not a lot of synthetics. If you want a good food plot and you want deer coming in and healthy plants, look at the food plot fertilizer through Rackology. Check us out at rackology.org. Thanks for tuning in.
Let's talk about a hunter's layering system for a sec. We need to be ready for any weather that Mother Nature throws at us. With the layering concepts that Minus 33 has created with their incredible merino wool products, they've got you covered. The Minus 33's merino wool expedition weight garments will keep you warm on the coldest late season days while regulating and wicking away moisture in a way that only merino wool can do. You see, wool will absorb up to 30% of its weight in moisture without leaving you feeling wet or clammy, and wool insulates better than cotton or polyester and protects against hypothermia on those late season hunts. And here's another interesting point. You might not think of wool for early season, but with the Minus 33 wicking technology, I'll take a lightweight Minus 33 base layer any day in warm weather. Merino wool fibers naturally reject any bacteria found in moisture or sweat and gives you double protection against odor as your target buck approaches. Visit www.minus33.com to learn more about Minus 33's layering technology. Use the code BIGBUCK33 to get 10% off your next order.
Now here's Jim Keller with the deer news.
Our first story this week, former Steubenville, Ohio officer sentenced for poaching scheme. This story is from the dailyjeff.com website. A former Steubenville police officer has been sentenced along with 4 other men for running an illegal poaching scheme in Jefferson County, Ohio, Attorney General Dave Yost announced at the end of January. A 3-year investigation by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Division of Wildlife, with assistance from the Bureau of Criminal Investigations Environmental Enforcement Unit, found that former officer Nathan Klein and his accomplices took paying clients to private and public properties to hunt without approval from landowners. The crimes occurred from 2006 to 2017. Assistant Attorneys General from Yost's office served as special assistant prosecutors for the case. Judge Michelle Miller of the Jefferson County Common Pleas Court sentenced Klein to 2 years in prison, 5 years of probation, ordered him to pay restitution of $29,165 to the Ohio DNR Division of Wildlife. Klein, who was the ringleader of the group, also had his hunting license suspended for 3 years and must pay a $3,000 fine. He was convicted in December of 5 felony charges, including attempted engaging in a pattern of corrupt activity and unauthorized use of the law enforcement automated data systems, LEADS, in addition to 11 misdemeanor wildlife violations. The city of Steubenville fired him in October. The other men sentenced included Marlon Hale, 3 months in jail, 6 months in community-based correction facility, 5 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, 3-year hunting license suspensions, $3,000 in fines, and $2,600 in restitution. Robert Gilbert, 910 days in jail, which was suspended, 5 years of probation, 3 years hunting license suspension, $6,000 fine, and $18,725 in restitution. Waylon Dietrich, 90 days in jail, which was suspended, 2 years of probation, $1,000 fine, $1,000 restitution, and Richard Haar, $750 fine, $1,250 in restitution. 2 other men, Joshua McLaren and Ronnie Griffith, were sentenced previously to 1-year hunting license suspension in order to pay fines and restitutions of more than $1,000 each for their roles in the scheme. New York DEC announces 2018 bear harvest results. This story is from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation website. New York State bear hunters took 1,295 black bears during the 2018 hunting seasons. Hunters took an estimated 804 black bears in New York's southern zone in 2018, about 20% fewer than 2017 and the recent 5-year average. With reduced natural forage for bears this past fall and deep snows in mid-November prior to the regular firearm season, many bears went into dens a few weeks earlier than normal. As a result, although bear take through the early season and bow season was comparable to 2017, take during the regular season declined by more than 40% from 2017. Similarly, hunters took about 45% fewer bears during the northern zone regular season in 2018 than they did in 2017. However, bear take during the early season was particularly strong, with nearly a 3-fold increase over 2017 and a 50% increase over the 5-year average. Thus, in total, hunters took an estimated 491 bears in the northern zone, about 25% more than 2017 and on par with the historical average. For more information and other notable numbers on the bear harvest, view the press release and bear harvest pages on the DEC website. New study finds deer species react differently to wolves. This story is from the Flathead Beacon News website. A new study shows that different types of deer react differently when approached by hungry wolves. Researchers at the University of Washington recently studied how wolves are interacting with two species of deer in the state, the white-tailed and the mule deer. The study found that white-tailed deer are graceful runners who will seek flat ground in an effort to outrun wolves, but mule deer have developed a quick jump escape technique that makes them appear to go bouncing off on a pogo stick. This is effective for escaping on uneven, rocky ground. The researchers found that mule deer will move to higher elevations and steeper slopes to avoid the predators. White-tailed deer are more comfortable running from wolves and sometimes move to flatter ground where they can better see wolves coming. Remember these facts on your next hunt. Road commissions ask whoever's leaving deer bait on side of the highway to stop. This story is from the Up North Live website and was reported by Anne Marie Kent. The Chippewa County, Michigan Road Commission is asking whoever is putting deer feed on the side of the road to stop. Corn is being put on the shoulder of M48 between Prentice Bay Road and Gettsville, and it's attracting deer. The Road Commission said when one of their drivers approached the area, more than 20 deer were on the shoulder of the highway. They said it causes hazardous conditions for both deer and drivers. That concludes this week's edition of the Big Buck Registry's Deer News. Special thanks to John Geis, Ken DeRogers, and Aaron Heldreth for leads on stories this week. For links for the stories featured this week, please check our show notes at www.bigbuckregistry.com. If you have any ideas for future topics or have any questions about any of these topics, please email me at jim@bigbuckregistry.com. For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News.
Well, thanks to Jim Keller for the Deer News. Without further ado, here is Harmon Carson. Harmon Carson, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. How are you, my friend?
Thank you. I'm doing well. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, man, we're psyched. We've heard a lot about you. Had a lot of requests to have you on the show, and I hear you're doing some kind of unique things, and I thought we should explore, as we like to do here on the Big Buck Registry. We like to explore different hunters around the country and see what they're doing, how they're doing it, and what makes them tick. So you fit that bill as a unique individual.
I don't know about all that.
Well, that's what they told me. So I said, all right, we got to go there then. So where are you from? Where do you call home?
I am from Houghton, Louisiana, which is close to Shreveport, Louisiana.
Okay.
When anybody asks where you're from in Louisiana, a lot of times it's easier just to say like New Orleans, even though that's 6 hours away, because that's the only city in Louisiana anybody knows of.
No, I understand. You know, I'm from Hopkinton, New Hampshire. So when I'm traveling, people say, where are you from? I say I'm from Boston.
Right. I gotcha.
Same kind of thing.
Yeah. So I'm from Houghton. I'm actually from Elm Grove, Louisiana. I grew up on a farm, but I currently reside in Houghton.
Okay. All right. So tell me about your earliest experiences. What brought you to first fall in love with hunting or deer hunting in general?
Ooh, that's a long story. Big question.
It's a big question, but I want to go there because this is going to reveal some of your idiosyncrasies and characteristics.
Right. Well, like I said, I grew up on a farm about 25 miles outside of town. And I'm the youngest of three, and I have two older brothers, and there wasn't any neighbors around. So it was either hang out with your brothers or go find something to do outside. There wasn't the technology then. I'm 32 years old. So, I mean, I'm not real old, but, technology that came out yesterday is already obsolete today, it seems like. But, so it was a matter where when I was younger, my mom was one of those who she'd say, go outside and play. And, all but lock the door and not let you in until dinner time. And so it was one of those deals where, I grew up on a farm and my interests were fishing, being out in the woods. And I just got to where I enjoyed being out there. I learned, or that's where I kind of started paying attention to animals and trying to figure them out. And so I spent a lot of time fishing and being in the woods early on. And my dad was a big hunter. Okay. And he doesn't bow hunt near as much now as what he used to, but he was a big time bow hunter, and that was one of the exciting times for me, was watching my dad leave to go hunting. And again, before cell phones and all that, you'd have to wait and see his headlights coming down the road, and we'd run outside and look his arrows over, see if any were missing, see if there was any blood on any arrows, and just sit. And he wouldn't, a lot of times he wouldn't even tell us that he shot something. He'd just set the bow down and let us figure it out. And so that was always exciting, but that kind of piqued an interest early on in hunting. And just being in the woods with my dad, he let me go with him as much as possible, and at least when he was out scouting and looking around. And Colorado every year, from the time I was probably two or 3 years old, my dad went out there every year elk and mule deer hunting, and so I always went and ran around the mountains with him, and so I was exposed to Western hunting early on as well. But
oh wow,
that's sparked everything. It was one of those things I couldn't help but be immersed in it, just because of how I grew up, where I grew up. Spent all my time outside. And watching my dad, and he would show me things and explain things to me, and that's just kind of how it was.
That's interesting that you as a child had exposure, being where you're from, to the Western hunting too.
Yeah. So that's it is interesting, and I'm very blessed and thankful for it. That was actually the first place I ever bow hunted in my life, was in Colorado.
No kidding.
Yeah, and it's funny now, being from Louisiana. In fact, my brother killed an elk when he was 15, and he was honored, I guess, at the local Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation for being the youngest bow hunter from the state of Louisiana to ever kill an elk.
Really?
And I followed in his footsteps 3 years later and killed my first elk when I was 15. So it was kind of, it's like I said, we've had unique experiences. We've been blessed.
That's very cool. I want to go back and explore something you said about your dad. You said that he would kill something and then let you figure it out. What does that mean?
Well, he would basically he'd come in, and like I said, he wears old tree bark coveralls, and he'd bring his bow in, and he'd set it down, and he'd sit there and talk. We like, what is it? Did you see anything? Yeah, I saw a doe. I saw such and such, and he just acted real nonchalant about it. And sometimes it would even be we would even sit down and be eating dinner, and he'd have his bow sitting over there on the counter. And, me and my oldest brother isn't really into hunting, but my middle brother and myself are. And we'd be, grilling him, asking him all kinds of questions. Well, what happened? What'd you see? What about this? And the first time that I remember, it seems like he said, well, look at my bow. What you think about my bow? Or I forget, I don't remember how he worded it, but, and we looked over, and there was like a blood soaked arrow. And that kind of, we were like, oh, you shot something, we got all excited. And then from there it was, then you get to hear the full story with all the details, and he'd take us out. And so from then on, it was like, okay, when Dad gets in, look his bow over. And sometimes there'd be an arrow missing. And, and it was just, he kind of made it a game. I guess it was, we were young, and it was fun for him to see us figure it out. But he did that pretty frequently.
Okay. Would he have you in the woods, or maybe go back to the spot of the hunt and have you try to track kind of thing too, or was that something else?
Yeah, no, a lot of times when he would kill something, he would take us, depending on the situation. But if it was where we could go with him, he would take us into the woods, and he'd show us how to blood trail and kind of walk us through everything. And he'd go along, and we'd go in there. And sometimes he'd already have the deer found, and he would just take us to the blood trail and act like he was looking for it with us, and kind of let us work the blood trail out ourselves. And we'd get to go do the recovery with him, and that was always really neat.
That is cool. That's a great way to learn.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you got to have a dad that's a good hunter to do that, typically speaking.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. No, and he was always one that, or he is, but he's always one that kind of frustrated people that were around him a lot of times, because he'd always kill deer when other people weren't, or the deer he'd kill were always better, a little bit nicer quality, and he'd figure out the areas where the deer were, and sometimes it would seem like they were right in the middle of everybody else, and he was still pulling out deer. So yeah, he definitely is a good hunter.
That's good. So you're so your dad was really a pretty good hunter. What was the population of the deer herd around you growing up? Was it plentiful enough where you could have lots of interactions and trials and tests, failure to learn what you did right and what you did wrong?
Yes and no.
Okay.
It was, and the reason why I say that is I was probably deer hunting when, I don't know, Dad probably started taking me hunting with him, not with a gun, when I was probably around 3 years old, 3 to 4. He'd have me in a stand with him. And it was funny. He a lot of times he would climb up this was before, we ever hunted with box stands or anything. Rifle hunting is very popular down here. But he would be in a tree stand, and he would set a milk crate on the ground underneath his tree and brush it in, and I would sit on a milk crate underneath the tree stand, and he would sit up in the tree. And so that's how we hunted together a lot of times. So he could get up high and see the deer coming, and that's kind of how I learned, I guess the ropes of, how, he'd talk to me as we were going in and talk to me as we were going out, and every now and then he'd drop candy on top of me, keep me occupied. But it was one of those things where, like I said, I started hunting probably around 5-6 years old by myself. It was one of those things that, looking back now, me and my brother talk about, we would have probably been successful a whole lot earlier on had Dad actually sat with us. But, it was just where we were. Dad obviously wanted to go hunt and do his thing without us bugging him, I guess. But he would, we grew up shooting guns, so it wasn't a big deal for us to have a gun by ourselves early on. But I started with a 410 with a slug, and he'd set me up behind a log on a milk crate, and say, okay, this is probably where the deer are going to come from. And obviously we'd gone through the practice and all that. And then he would leave, and he'd leave and walk, 200 yards, 300 yards, however far where he wanted to hunt, and leave me sitting there at, 5, 6, 7 years old, probably not 5, maybe 6, 7, 8 years old, with a shotgun. And I did that. And I only remember seeing deer like twice, excuse me, like twice during that time. I never hardly ever remember seeing deer when I was doing that. And I really think it boils down to me just moving too much, not knowing what to do, when to move, when not to move, and just being a kid by myself and getting distracted. And, everything in the woods is scary at that age. And, you moving around too much, essentially. So I did not actually kill my first deer, even with a rifle, until I was 12 years old. But I started hunting when I was like I said, 5, 6-ish.
Okay.
And it was a deal. Like I said, my dad wasn't one. He would like coach you and walk you through things, but he also wasn't going to he didn't like hold your hand. It was like, here you go, this is how you do it. And like, in the training, teaching you scenario, he would walk through and make sure you got everything down. But then, when it actually came to hunting, a lot of times it was like, okay, I'm going to set you down here. If a deer walks out, shoot it, and then he would walk off and he'd go hunt somewhere else. And so there was we probably would have learned a little bit quicker on one hand, had he sat there with us and said, no, don't do this. No, you can't move like that. You got to do this. But by the same token, it's the whole trial. We had a lot of trial early on. So by the time we did actually get where we were killing deer, we as in me and my brother, by the time we did actually get where we were killing deer, it was like a switch flipped, and we realized it was, something clicked, and this is what you're supposed to do, or this is what you're not supposed to do. And it was like, once you killed your first deer, it was game on. And there's been deer hitting the ground ever since. And so it was like a long process. So the deer population was there, but we were in an area where I don't remember how many people were hunting this property, but they shot everything, like button bucks, spikes, 4 points, 6 points, 12 points. It didn't matter. You know, they were shooting deer, period. And because of that, you kind of had this weird, you know, when the population starts dropping in a lot of areas, you have deer that'll start putting out twins, you know, and so you'll have a lot of yearlings running around. But the deal was, the following year, those same guys were shooting all the yearlings. You know, it was tons of button bucks getting shot, tons of spikes getting shot. And so the population was there, but it was like I don't know how to describe it. It was just it was an odd situation. People hammered them, and Dad always tried to get us in areas where, you know, we weren't going to have to deal with other people shooting around, obviously, a whole lot. And still, and I think that might have been part of the reason. Mm-hmm. We had issues early on, but again, it probably boiled down to us not knowing any better.
Well, I love what he did there. I love that he gave you some guidance, but then he let you figure out a lot of it. And to think that, you know, in these days that, you know, leave a kid in the woods nearby, and then to go hunt a different section with just saying, okay, I want you to, if a deer comes by, shoot it.
Yeah.
Without having parental supervision side by side. I understand that, you know, there's a need for that too, but those days I think are gone. Like people won't do that anymore.
No, there's very few 15, 16-year-olds that I would trust with a gun by themselves.
Right. No, I agree. But at the same token, I would assume there would have been enough, or not good, decent number of years where you were trained enough where he trusted you with your weapon. Enough.
Oh, absolutely.
And then understand the weapon is a huge piece of it, but then there's your abilities, right? Learning how to take the kill shot. That's not such an easy thing to learn. You got to be able to do it multiple times to understand when you can move, when you cannot move, when to aim, when to, you know, when's that shot the right shot? Are they close enough? What's the deer's positioning? Is there any stuff in the way? You know, there are a lot of different things.
He was one of those who, you know, early on, basically do not take the shot unless it's broadside. Like, absolutely had to be broadside, and he just kind of beat that into us. You know, you only, and obviously it was for the fact that we were, you know, immature hunters, and that was just the safest bet for him, for the deer, for us, you know, is to wait until the deer is broadside, put it right up against the shoulder and, you know, middle of the body, and shoot. And, you know, and that's where you aim. And before he would leave, he would basically point out a tree and say, don't shoot the deer unless he's this side of that tree right there. And so he would give us little pointers like that. And then he would go through shot placement with us, even before we would, you know, obviously before we were actually hunting, he was just going over shot placement on deer pictures and magazines and stuff. Where would you shoot the deer? Where would you shoot the deer? And kind of training us that way. That way, when we were left and presented with an opportunity, it wouldn't be what do I do? Or you're just shooting at the deer, you know, just to be shooting. You know, made us pick a spot and make sure you're picking hairs and you're not just shooting at the, you know, at the ribs, pick hairs on the ribs type deal. So he explained it really well, but still left us to our own mistakes.
That's kind of, I like that. You know, you think about, don't just pick an area, pick a spot.
Yeah.
Yep. And pick a hair, not just a rib. Pick a hair on the rib, not just a group of hairs. A hair. Pick a hair.
Right.
That's your aim spot. Brilliant. You had a good.
Honestly, that little bit of info has translated throughout my entire life to just about every aspect of my life. as crazy as that might sound, and it's making sure you're able to see the whole picture. But when it comes down to the focus part of it, being able to pick out individual details and the importance of those details.
Right.
And that was one of those, I realized early on, and I don't know if it was just me or, my brother was the same way or what, but when you really focus on the hairs, on that little spot, good things happen. When you flock shoot, bad things happen. It's when you focused on the details, that's when you get good results.
Isn't that a classic life moment? Don't just focus on the general. Focus on a specific, pinpoint, accurate detail.
Absolutely. Right. And like I said, it's translated into, especially how I hunt now. It's translated into mature hunt. Targeting mature bucks. Mm-hmm. I've said details make the master. The details of every situation in your life are what make up the big picture. Right. And when you focus on those details, the big picture will kind of take care of itself.
Right. Let's talk about some of the other finer details of how you hunt today because of that moment, because of those teaching moments that your father had with you way back. And absolutely, it's relative to life. Anything you do from here on out, you're going to have, and look at your profession as a taxidermist, details are super important.
Right.
Let's talk about some of your hunting strategies and styles today compared to where they were maybe when you began. It sounds like you are or have graduated to a certain level of hunting abilities and only use certain weapons to hunt with at this point. And I'd like to understand your progression, probably going back to your dad's teaching. Let's kind of pick up there. Where are you at today, and how did you develop into the hunter you are now?
Well, I currently am a traditional bow hunter.
Okay.
I started hunting with a recurve in 2011, and I haven't picked up a compound since then. All I hunt with is a recurve, a longbow now.
Wow.
To get there, again, my dad had me shooting a bow. I've always been interested in archery. Robin Hood was my hero growing up.
Sure. Right.
I'd go cut down saplings and steal thread from my mom and, make a bowstring and make a bow. And I ran around my yard shooting hay bales, pretending they were buffalo or, I can't think of the bad guy on Robin Hood, but the bad guy on Robin Hood, Prince John or whatever. That was my playtime. Was shooting a little makeshift bow that I made, and then the first bow that my dad got me was one of those little pulley bows that shot like a recurve.
Right.
And I ran around, I shot instinctive, and so I grew up shooting the traditional style with no sights. Even my first compound, like actual compound, I was shooting instinctively, shooting fingers, no sights. And I did that for a long time. Now, this wasn't hunting. Again, this is just me having it was a toy, it was a serious toy, but it was a toy. And I'd go stump shoot essentially, I'd go shoot trees and stumps and leaves and pine cones. And, like I said, I grew up on a farm, and I'd chase birds around, try to find rabbits to hunt, and with my bow. Well, I was finally, I think in Louisiana, you have to be able to draw 40, or it's changed now, but it used to be 40 or 45 pounds to be able to hunt legally. So I wasn't able to hunt in Louisiana because I wasn't able to draw a bow heavy enough. And again, we were going to Colorado every year. So in Colorado, when we would go up there, Dad would go off hunting. I was too young to hunt because you have to be 12 years old in Colorado to be able to bow hunt. And so I would play. I brought my slingshot with me, and so I spent all day and all week in camp with the slingshot, chasing grasshoppers and squirrels, the pine squirrels up there with a slingshot. And and then I'd go with Dad if he'd kill something, or go help him scout, hang a stand, whatever. And so that was my, and so I was always kind of in the instinctive mode, even with the slingshot. Well, when I turned 12, the year I turned 12, that was the year I was actually able to draw 45 pounds on a bow. And so that year for my birthday, my dad got me a bow and said, "You're going to hunt with me in Colorado this year." and so.
And how old were you then?
12.
12. All right. So that's young.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, okay. Time for the big show.
Right. And again, it was one of those things where, so he got me the bow early in the summer. And so I shot all summer leading up to it. And that year he just got me I got a mule deer tag. And so I went in with only a mule deer tag. Well, the very first bow hunt I ever had, I climbed an aspen tree. My dad hung a tree stand, and then bow hunting was a different story. It was a little more obviously I was up in a tree and not sitting behind a log, and I'm in the mountains and I have a bow. So Dad hunted with me. It wasn't here you go, I'm going to leave you. So he actually climbed up a different tree behind me about, 8-10 yards away. But where we could communicate, I could hear him whispering and he could kind of coach me. And, man, not long after daylight, I had massive 6x6 bull elk comes by, walks by 20 yards away, stops. And, and we hunt out west the same way we hunt down south. We hunt the elk and mule deer like we hunt whitetails. We find sign, we find the pinch point, the saddles, and we hang tree stands in the prevailing wind, where it's going to be in our benefit.
Okay.
And so it's completely different than how most people hunt out west. But that's, it works for us down here, and animal behavior tends to be the same. So that's what we did. So we found a couple of trails coming around a saddle and hung some stands, and this big bull elk comes out. And so I'm 12 years old, and Dad's over there whispering to me. He said, take your arrow off and draw and pretend like you're going to shoot this elk. Pick a spot, draw, settle your pin. And so that was my first bow hunt. I got to experience coming to full draw on a 6x6 bull elk at 20 yards and settling a pin and pretending like I was going to shoot him. And it was just phenomenal. Well, a little bit, the elk left, and a little bit later, a doe comes out, and she was right there beside me, and I went to draw my bow. And as I'm drawing my bow, Dad says, no. And I can hear him. And I let down and look at him like, what's going on? There's a deer in front of me. Let me kill it. And, well, she had twins. And Dad was like, no, you're not, we're not shooting a doe with twins. And so even at 12 years old, it was, again, one of those lessons, like, I guess responsibility, discipline. You're not going to do this. You're not, don't shoot a doe with twins. And then that evening we had a black bear come in, try to climb the tree with my dad. And, again, I'm just sitting there with the bow. That's the only weapon there. And I'm thinking, I'm fixing to have to shoot this bear off of my dad with a bow. And I'm 12 years old, kind of freaking out. And so that was my introduction into bow hunting. That was my first day bow hunting ever. And so I had no choice but to love it.
Kind of makes you fall in love with it, though. I mean, how can you not love it after that kind of opener? Wow.
Right. And so that hunt, I did shoot at a deer. I stalked up. We were driving around down one of the national forest roads, and there was a doe bedded up on a ridge. And Dad said, if you think you can go stalk it, I'll sit here on the four-wheeler and you go after it. And I said, okay. Well, I actually managed to crawl up within like 15 yards of that doe. And when I raised up and shot, I didn't know there's a limb that covered her, and I hit that limb, and the arrow just missed her it sailed right over her back. But that was the first thing I ever shot at with a bow, was a mule deer doe that I crawled up on and shot. And like I said, I hit a limb. But again, that was my first bow hunting trip ever. And so my first I hadn't even bow hunted in Louisiana up to that point. And so I get back to Louisiana, and, I was fired up. And I think within the first week, I shot a doe the first week of season, and I blooded her up. We didn't find her. and I was, beat up. I didn't kill anything that year. Actually, that was the year I killed my first deer. When I did all that stuff, I hadn't even killed a deer yet, like even with a gun. And so that November, I killed my first deer with a gun. And then the following year, when I was 13, I killed my first deer with a bow. Bow hunting became one of those things that it was just, I loved it. I couldn't get enough of it. The experience was just the being up close and personal, and the anxiety that you felt, was way more intense than what I felt with a rifle. And I recognized the difference early on, to the point to where by the time I turned 16, I was pretty much only bow hunting. And I only picked up a rifle, I think 8 or 10 times that year. And when, by the time I turned 17, I totally quit. I hadn't picked up a gun. I hadn't deer hunted with a gun since I was 16, and I'm 32. So that kind of tells you how early I got hooked into bows, and I have had no desire to hunt with a gun since then.
Wow.
And so part of it was when I was 14, I killed a 149-inch 8-point. Just a beast of a buck, biggest buck that had been killed in this area in years. And I killed him when I was 14. 2 years later, when I was 16, one of those 8 to 10 times I brought a gun with me, I had a 143-inch 8-point walk out on me, and I shot him, and he was in bow range. And I shot him, and I said, this is and when I killed the first one, it was bigger than anybody that we knew had ever killed. And they were like, you're never going to kill a deer bigger than that. You're 14. You're not going to top that one. And so 2 years later at 16, I killed another 140-inch 8-point. And I was like, you know what? I've done something that not very many people get to do. I've managed to kill 2 phenomenal bucks for anywhere, but especially for here in Louisiana. And that was part of what pushed me into going strictly bow hunting, is the fact that I had success early on with a gun, and had killed 2 just very respectable bucks early with a gun. And it just kind of pushed me even more to want to do that with a bow. And so I started bow hunting, and I was like, I'm not going to shoot another deer with a gun until I kill a 140-inch 8-point with a bow. That was my mentality, is like, I'm very goal oriented. With anything, but especially with hunting, I'm very goal oriented. So it was like, okay, well, I've managed to kill 240-inch deer with a gun. I'm not going to hunt with a gun again until I kill a 140-inch deer with a bow. And then by the time you spend so much time in the woods with a bow, a gun's not even appealing to you anymore. To where, I've killed a couple of deer over 140 with my bow since, and I still have no desire. I'm not going back to a gun anytime soon. But anyway, so that was all with the compound.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
then I had further progression after that.
Right. So, like I said, from 16, I don't know what year that was, but to 2011, I was bow hunting, and man, I was killing multiple deer a year. Killed several, good bucks, nice bucks. And, I was still trying to hit that 140-inch goal of mine with a bow. And, in the summer of 2011, I'd always wanted to, like, towards that time frame, I'd started getting really interested in traditional archery again. And I'd always had recurves, and I always shot them around the house still, but I'd never deer hunted with them. I never hunted big game with them. And so something was just kind of started eating on me. Like, you need to try this. You need to try to kill a deer with a bow, with a recurve. And it was just one of those goals, one of those challenges that I gave myself, that you need to try this. So that summer, I went by a guy's house, and he was out shooting. It is a buddy of mine. He was out shooting a bow, and he had a Blackwater recurve, and I was actually going fishing, and I swung in, and I said, man, let me shoot your bow real quick. And I shot it, and it messed me up, because I fell in love with it even more. And I was like, I literally went home after I got through fishing. I went home, found a recurve that I still hunt with now. I found it on eBay for half the price of what it would be regularly. It was exactly everything that I was looking for, and I bought it that day. and I was like, and it was a black widow, and I was like, you know what, if I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna go all out, because if I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna jump all in. And I was like, I'm gonna drop the money up front. That way, it's gonna make me. I'm thinking if I'm not invested in it, I'm probably not going to do it very much. So I dropped, I think it was like $680, which is a stupid good deal on a Black Widow recurve. But it was like $680 shipped to my door, and that just kind of sparked it. So the rest, once I got it, I started shooting. And so 2011, I was again hunting mule deer in Colorado, because obviously their season opens up before Louisiana season. And so I managed to kill my first deer. My first trad bow kill was a mule deer in Colorado.
Wow. And
that again messed me up. It was one of those experiences to where, I had a buddy filming me, and I shot, and I turned, and I was shaking. I looked at the camera, and I'm like, that was just like shooting your first deer all over again. Right. And it's been like that every single time I've shot a deer with a traditional bow. That excitement, it's like killing your first deer every single time. Like the excitement is unreal. And so I came back to Louisiana, and opening day of bow season in Louisiana, I actually killed a really nice, it was a 3.5-year-old 7-point here in Louisiana with a recurve. And I was like, man, there's nothing to this. And it was just, early success obviously helped me out. But that year I was actually hunting a really studly buck. It was actually the buck that kind of taught me how to hunt big bucks. I'd been hunting him real hard. And when I was in this area, I kept bringing my compound. I was actually carrying my compound and my recurve with me. And
really?
So okay. Because I wasn't confident enough in myself just to bring my recurve. And because the buck I was hunting was a stud, like 150-inch buck, 150, 160-inch deer. And I was confident. I mean, with my compound, it was nothing. It's nothing for me to shoot 50, 60 plus yards with a compound and not think anything of it. I shoot really good with the compound. And so I was hunting the edges of fields and stuff like that, to where if this big buck walked out, I would have the opportunity to shoot him at a longer distance. And so I was bringing my compound with me, and I actually shot my recurve with my release on my wrist. And just in case, something came out. Well, this buck showed up in a spot that was not set up for hunting with a recurve. It was real brushy. And recurves are obviously longer than compounds. So I didn't have the freedom of movement, and most of my shots would be like 30-ish yards. And at the time I was nowhere close to being, proficient at that range with the trad bow. Again, it was my first year to hunt with a trad bow. So, I took my compound on that particular hunt to that spot, and I didn't kill the deer I was after, but I killed another buck that was hanging out with him, and the deer scored right at 140 inches. It was a 140-inch 9-point, and that was the last deer I killed with my compound bow. And I was like, all right, I met my goal. And it was funny. I met the goal with my compound the same year I picked up the recurve, and I told myself it's another goal. I told myself, I'm not picking up a compound until I do this with the trad bow. And I've been glued to my trad bows ever since. I have obviously learned a lot more since then, because the first few animals I shot, man, I was shooting arrows that were untuned. It was like, looking back on it now, it was ridiculous. My arrows were all but flying sideways through the air. I didn't know any better. I was like, yeah, I'm hitting where I'm looking. And obviously they weren't flying that bad, but they weren't tuned. And now I've figured it out a little bit better now.
Right. Gotcha. Fascinating journey from where you started to where you are today, and to the point where you're really getting down to that traditional, raw, fundamental style of bow hunting.
Right.
But it takes some time to get there, and a comfort level, a confidence level.
Yeah, confidence is everything with traditional. And now I was talking to a guy yesterday, the he was like, man, what'd you do when you get started? Like, were you watching videos? Is there a traditional bow shop by you that helped you out? And I was like, no, it was a whole lot of trial and error, because the internet wasn't, I know it's 2011, but still you didn't have, and honestly, a lot of it probably had to do with, I didn't know where to look. Whereas now I've been in it so long, I do know where to look. But now there's so many really good resources, and even groups on Facebook with people willing to help you out. And I didn't know a whole lot of stuff. I didn't know where to go look. And so a lot of it was trial and error. I read a lot of books, and I got on some forums, and I realized you can get a lot of really bad information on forums. I figured that out early. And, so a lot of it was just trial and error, and figuring it out. But yeah, it's definitely a confidence level that you've got to have with the trad bow. That obviously you got to have more confidence with the compound than what you do with the rifle, and so it's even that much more compounded with a traditional bow.
If you had to do it all over again, would you change anything?
No, probably not.
Okay.
Because, and I'll tell anybody who's interested. And a lot of people that I've talked to, people will reach out wanting information or wanting help, and I'll start asking them, well, what's your experience bow hunting? How long have you been bow hunting? Have you ever killed a deer with a bow? And if they're complete newbies, like they're just wanting to get into bow hunting and they're really interested in the traditional archery, I'll tell them, man, do yourself a favor, go buy a compound, get good with the compound, and learn how to bow hunt. There is a difference in learning. There's a difference, especially if all you've done is hunted with a rifle. There's a major difference. There's a huge learning curve. So I had the benefit of bow hunting from the time I was 12 until, I was in my mid 20s before I picked up a trad bow. And so I knew how to bow hunt, and all I did was change weapons. And so there's a huge difference. So you've got to learn how to bow hunt before you're going to be successful with the trad bow. Yeah, you can get lucky, but you're going to be frustrated otherwise. And the way I learned, it was a progression, and I started hunting with a compound, and it was frustrating. Granted, I was still learning how to deer hunt that early. But there was a new learning curve there. So I'm having to figure out how to get deer close to me. And so I'm having to pay attention to those details, and having to learn how to hunt with a bow. And then once the deer gets there, what can I get away with? What can I get away with? Where do I shoot? You can't get away with all the stuff that you would with a gun, even with a compound. And then when you go to a trad bow, you're even more restricted with the things you can and can't get away with. You have to pay even closer attention to even smaller details to be able to get the animal, within range a lot of times. And hunting makes you a better hunter. And then swapping over to a traditional bow makes you an even better hunter if you let it. And a lot of folks I talk to, they want to jump out, and and I don't know whether they think it's just cool. They like the idea of them walking around with a curved stick in their hand. I don't know.
Right.
But there's a lot of people who just want to jump into it, but they have no background knowledge. That's the reason why I'm sure you've heard of Aaron Snyder. He has been super successful with the traditional bow, and people and it's been amazing, and I'm not knocking the guy by any means, but people are like, I can't believe you've been so successful. Well, if you listen to him and go back and you look at his success, the guy knew how to bow hunt before he grabbed a traditional bow.
Right.
You've got to learn how to hunt before you swap weapons. If you don't know how to hunt, then it don't matter if you're hunting with a gun. I know people who struggle to kill deer with a gun, and it's all goes down to learning how to hunt. Aaron knew how to hunt before he knew how to bow hunt before he grabbed a traditional bow. I knew how to bow hunt before I grabbed a traditional bow, and had years and years of experience. I've got a lot of animals under my belt with a bow, and it's just helped helped make that learning curve a lot shorter. So no, I wouldn't change anything because of that. I would have been frustrated a lot earlier on, and I would have been so frustrated where I was like, you know what, forget this. I'm going to go back and stick with my compound. But because of the success I had with the compound and actually taking the time to learn it, it just translated over to traditional archery. And I'd tell anybody who's interested in traditional archery, make sure you learn how to bow hunt, get some animals under your belt with a compound, and then try the trad bow. I absolutely think everybody and anybody who's interested in bow hunting needs to try it, because it's unlike anything you'll ever do.
Right.
But don't frustrate yourself.
Gotcha. So, okay, so you went through your thing. You wouldn't change anything. If somebody wanted to go from compound to traditional today, what would you say to them? What's your recommendation to get started? I know you touched on it a little bit, but just that guy that no matter what the age is, all right, I'm semi-proficient with my compound. I'm very good with my gun. I'm a good hunter overall. Like take the weapon away, I'm still a good hunter. What would you say to that guy or gal that wants to go from compound to some kind of traditional bow? Where would you point them exactly?
Do it.
Okay. Just do it.
Yeah, just do it. Seriously. The biggest, again, it goes back to confidence. The best thing that you can do is to get a bow that you're going to be comfortable with. The biggest mistake people make right off the bat is they get a bow that's too much for them. I did it starting out. When I first started, I was shooting 60-pound longbows. My dad actually has a 70-pound recurve, and I was running around the woods shooting that and was doing pretty terrible. And it's just, I shot good in the yard, but the whole time you're shooting, your body's screaming, "What are you doing? Let go!" And you can't focus. It's just not comfortable. All kinds of bad habits form. So, we have our egos that we're fighting, and with our compounds we're shooting. I shot like a 72-pound compound, and that's what I shot forever, was a 70-pound compound. And most guys I know are shooting minimum 60-pound compound. So the starting out, I would not break 50 pounds. For anybody starting out, they need to be starting out in probably the 45-pound range. 50 pounds would be okay. I started out at 50. And that, again, that's if you are, you gotta look at it relative to what you're shooting with a compound. But just because you're shooting 60 pounds with a compound doesn't mean you can go pick up a 60-pound trad bow. And that's the biggest thing I would tell anybody is don't get too much of a bow. Start at 40, 45 pounds and just get comfortable with it. You don't even have to have arrows that are tuned. Obviously that'll help, but start out, man, just get comfortable shooting a bow. Have fun. Get it in the summertime, springtime, and just shoot it. Shoot it in your yard, shoot it, at leaves, shoot it at the target, and just get comfortable. Once you get comfortable and you kind of go through the motions, that's when you start, pulling it down and start looking at the details, where you're going to get your bow tuned. And really, people think it's completely different from a compound, but the mechanics are the same. So you still have to have an anchor point. You still follow through. You still have to have form. And people get caught up. They think it's snap shooting. Almost everybody I talk to, and there are people that do that, but almost everybody that I talk to who's not real familiar with trad bows, when you talk to them, they're like, yeah, you just, it's just as soon as you touch your face, you let go of the string, right? You're not even holding it back very long. Mm. No, that's not the case. Some people shoot that way, but I actually will hold my bow, 5 to 8 seconds sometimes. Like I'll hold my bow almost as long as what I would with a compound. And it's just when I first started out, I was shooting real quick, but you cannot train that as well. You cannot develop that, especially under pressure. So the mechanics are the same. You cannot look at it as it's a completely different. It's like people get a recurve and throw everything they ever learned about shooting a bow out the window. Just because you're shooting with fingers doesn't mean that you don't still need an anchor point.
Yeah.
So the mechanics are the same. I highly would recommend trying to find someone who is willing to coach you. That'll definitely help. Find somebody who's close to you. Find somebody online. That's another thing. If you find somebody on Facebook or a forum, make sure that person, and this might step on toes or whatever, but make sure the person that you're reaching out to is somebody who's been successful. There are a lot of guys that I've seen on these forums that give information, and then you start looking into their history, and they might have been bow hunting 20 years and they've only killed 6 deer. Well, that's not somebody I want to get information from. Okay. All right. Find somebody who's been successful at what you're wanting to be successful at and pick that person's brain. And there's a lot of really, really good resources and people that are willing to help out there.
Gotcha. Let's take a little break. And when we come back, we'll pick up where we left off with Harmon Carson.
Rackology Deer Supplement and Attractant, developed through years of intense scientific research, comes a product that puts it all in one bag. Superior attractant, scientifically formulated vitamins and minerals, and all at a much better price. To get yours today, please check out rackology.org for a list of dealers. Rackology, how can you afford not to use it? Everything deer need, all in one bag.
And now back to our interview with Harmon Carson. So what about, equipment? I'm not super familiar with traditional bows. What kind of bow should I be looking for commercially or maybe secondhand used? I'm not sure.
Like I said, starting out, it really doesn't matter, as odd as that might sound, but the deal is until you've tried it, you don't know any better. So there's some wonderful bows that are just, man, they're smooth as butter. And then there's other bows that it's like you're trying to pull a freight train down the track when you're trying to draw it. But the deal is, if you don't know any better, you don't know any better.
Let's strip out the brand. What are you looking for in a bow?
So I'm looking for something that's comfortable. I want the grip to be comfortable. I want, when I draw, I don't feel like I'm having to strain at all. And you can have, we'll just say 50 pounds. You can grab 6 different bows at 50 pounds at your draw, and they're all going to feel different. They're not all going to feel that. And it's all because of how that bow is built. So some bows will feel really, really stiff when you draw. Some bows will be really smooth on the draw. You don't have a lot of stacking. And so you want to find a bow that doesn't stack a lot. Are you familiar with that term, stacking?
I'm not. And even if I was, I think we should clarify it for everybody.
Right. Okay. So stacking is, and I'm probably not going to explain this the proper way, but basically the further you draw the bow, the quicker the pounds add up. So, the bow is resting and then you draw at 10 inches. Some bows at 10 inches, even if they're all 50 pounds, some bows at 10 inches, we'll just say that, that bow is at 30 pounds, whereas other bows at 10 inches, the bow's only at 20 pounds.
Okay.
So it's like the pounds add up a whole lot faster when you're drawing.
Gotcha.
Whereas you actually want they don't have a breakover like a compound, but you want that bow to be peaked just before you hit your anchor point, to where you're not drawing full 50 pounds all the way back. You don't want it to hit actually 50 until you're right at your anchor, just before your anchor.
Yep. Gotcha. All right. Going back to one of your other comments, that you will pull and hold a traditional bow, similar to what you said, you'd hold a compound, yet the traditional doesn't have the let off, as far as I'm aware.
Right.
How do you prepare and train your muscles for that, so that you can hold without sacrificing the shot?
Well, it goes back to getting a bow that you're comfortable with, not getting a bow that's too heavy. And then it also goes back to shooting a lot. So it's similar muscles as what you'd be using a compound, almost identical. You still have back tension and all that you're focusing on, but you get a bow where you're going to be comfortable. Like if you draw a bow, when you hit your anchor point, if your fingers and your brain is screaming, let go, let go, let go, then you probably got too much bow. So I shoot a bow that I'm comfortable with, where I can draw, I hit my anchor, and part of it is just going through the motions, and that's, you have a blank hay bale or a blank target, and I will literally be standing 4 feet from it. I'll close my eyes, draw my bow, hit my anchor, focus on my back tension, and just slowly release, to where I'm focusing on those little bitty details where it becomes muscle memory. And so I'm anchoring, fully expand, and release. And you do that over and over and over, where you're focused on the details, the mechanics of it. And you're not thinking of, oh, I got to hold this. You're not thinking of the fact that you're holding. You're thinking about everything else. And the holding just becomes, like background noise. You don't even think about how long that you're holding. And so I will, once I get where I'm shooting well, and I'm consistent, at that point I'll actually go through motions, at least in the summertime. I'll go through the motions of drawing my bow and seeing how long I can hold my bow before I make a good shot, before I start breaking down. And obviously you got to be careful doing that, because you can develop bad form, bad habits. And as soon as you start shooting bad, quit. Don't do that anymore. But because a lot of times you go to shoot, even with the compound, you go to shoot and the animal stops behind a tree. What are you going to do?
Right.
With a trad bow, it's you either got to hold it or you got to let it down. And I've been stuck in both positions, because I've had bows, I've been held back before and had to hold for several seconds and then wound up having to let down. And sometimes it spooked the animal. Sometimes they start walking. Sometimes it's worked out, it's really similar, but it goes back to not having too much of a bow. Don't go too heavy too fast.
Gotcha. All right, so let's get into like some of your other hunting strategies, because despite your weapon, you still have to be a good hunter. So
absolutely,
what are some of the other things that you've developed over the years that you think are important for other hunters to develop, if they haven't developed, or maybe there's some guys that want to hear, well, maybe there are a couple things you're doing that they're not. What are the things that you focus on that put you in that tree stand or put you on the ground with your bow, getting close enough to that animal to take that shot with your bow, which has to be a close shot overall. It's not a 150-yard rifle. So you have to get close. You have to be aware. What are the other things you're doing to get that close to take a good ethical shot?
That's another big question. It's dependent on a lot of things. So I guess figure out how to answer this.
I'm thinking like, okay, so you've got some things, your woodsmanship, right? You've got some of that stuff. Scent control, wind.
So
movement.
On that regard, like, we'll just start with wind. I don't pay attention to scent control. I don't like spray myself down. I don't. Only thing I will do anymore is, and I used to do all this stuff, but the only thing I'll do anymore is I wash my clothes in unscented soap, just because clothing obviously holds more scent than your skin and hair and all that. So because of the fibers in clothing, I'll wash it with unscented stuff. I'm also using primarily merino wool just because of its scent cancellation qualities. It's in itself. But other than that, I'm getting out of the shower smelling like whatever my wife has in there for soap. I'm smelling like cucumber, fig, whatever.
Right.
So I'm not. The deal is, I'm in Louisiana, and if I'm going to hunt early October, I cannot count the number of days I have walked to my stand when it is 100+ degrees outside in early October, and I will climb the tree, sit in the stand, and it's 100 degrees, and it takes all evening. By the time the sun actually goes down, where the shadows get real long, at that point it might be 88. It's still going to be in the upper 80.
It gets warm humid. Where you are, right?
Oh, it's not warm. It's hot. It's a whole nother level of hot, because it's a humid, like a stagnant, you can't breathe type. And so the reason you can I will literally be soaked in sweat from the time I walk from my house to my truck. And that's not an exaggeration. I will have, not soaked in sweat, but I will have I will have sweat forming on my head from the time I walk from my house to my truck. That's how humid it is.
Yep.
So you can imagine by the time I throw on a backpack, grab my bow, and take off walking, if I walk 20, 30 yards, I've got a pretty good hefty thing of sweat going. Well, by the time I get to my tree, I'm soaked. You're a walking human scent wick.
Right.
And there's no, you can't control it. I don't care what anybody says. There is no, oh, let me spray myself down. Or even let me bring a different pair of clothing to change into once I get up in the tree. Just sitting there, you're going to sweat.
Right.
But it just is how it is. So because of that, I quit paying hardly any attention to scent control products because personally, I think it's just a waste of time down here.
Okay.
So I pay attention to the wind. I'm gonna make sure the wind is right. If I set up, I'm going to make sure I'm on the downwind side of the trail. My approach is downwind. I try to figure out where I think the animal is most likely going to come from and, set myself up accordingly. Because really, if you're hunting a mature buck, you want the wind to be, and this is just my opinion, but you want the wind to be almost wrong. So, because the buck is going to walk where that wind is in his favor. So, you've got to be and it's risky, but you got to figure out where you think that buck's going to come from and set up going to be just off of where he's coming in, because he's going to come in with the wind in his favor more times than not. And if you're set up where the wind is in your favor, you got to think about how that deer's going to approach. A lot of times they'll circle, they'll make a big hook. When they're approaching a scrape, approaching a food plot, approaching, whatever you're hunting over, a lot of times they're going to come in, and while, they would normally walk in from a certain direction, if the wind has shifted and it's blowing from a opposite, if it's typically prevailing north and for whatever reason you have a south wind, a lot of times that buck might come in like he normally does. And then before he approaches where he's coming, he's going to make a hook and get the wind in his favor. And so you've got to get on the downwind side to where you're almost going to mess up. And it's figuring out where that point is and not messing up is the trick.
Right.
But it's all about the wind for me. You've got to really, really watch the wind. And that's going to be probably the biggest thing. And I know, folks will set up spots and they're in a great spot. They're in a great location. They're getting deer on camera, but they're just not seeing deer. And then I've walked into their stand setups and I'm like, man, what are you doing? Your stand is in a great location if you're just looking at cover, but from a wind perspective, you've just alerted everything around here that you're here. And so that's a big thing I pay attention to. But again, I'm not big on scent control products. I'm just big on watching the wind.
Okay. What else do you focus on? If you're not watching scent control, that eliminates a lot of the need for the ozone, the soaps, the showers. Yeah. I mean, let's face it, you're already stinking by the time, even if you took a shower in that, especially early season where you're already sweating and stinking by the time you get to your stand.
Absolutely.
So as far as the stand is concerned, what are you looking for proper stand placement and height as far as that's concerned? Because I would assume playing the wind, yes, number one for you. Number two, if you're in a stand, does height matter?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I used to think that it mattered a whole lot more when I was hunting with the compound. So I was of the mindset, the higher you get, the better off you'll be, which on one hand is true. You get your wind up, it's going over the top of the deer. You get away with a lot more movement. You get away with a lot more scent, you could get away with paying less attention to the wind, I guess, if you're higher up the tree. You get away with a lot more movement again. You just get away with a lot more stuff when you're higher up the tree. The problem is your shot angles are typically pretty awful. You reduce your margin of error because you're taking your, I don't know how to talk about this over the phone or describe it over the phone, but you're target, instead of it being like broadside, it's like you're turning it to where you're narrow. Basically, you're going from like a 12-inch diameter, and you're narrowing it down where you only have to like 4 inches that you're hitting. Where you would maybe hit double long. Now you're only going to get one long, depending on obviously where the animal is at. There's a lot of dependencies there, but so when I place a stand. Now, that was one of the things I had to learn early on, especially, and it's more critical with the trad bow because your bow's not going as fast. You tend to hit a lot higher because the bow's going slow. The trajectory, the angles are more steep, so you hit higher. And I'm not a physics guy. I just know from experience what I've seen. So because of that, I hunt a whole lot lower than what most people do. Sometimes I can almost reach up and touch the bottom of my stand. But if I get low, I'm in cover. So I'm going to go out there and figure out how to completely disappear. I hunt out of a tree saddle now, but the idea is the same. Whether it's a tree saddle, a deer stand, ground blind even, you go to the woods to disappear. You don't go to hang out and watch what's going on. So if I'm going to be low, I'm going to try to find a tree with a fork, especially late season when all the leaves are off the ground. I'm going to try to find a fork, put my stand right at the bottom of that fork where I become a third fork of that tree, and the deer tend to just overlook it. So if I walk into an area and I'm like, okay, this is where I want to be, don't focus. This is one of those deals where you don't focus on the details at first. You can just kind of scan, and I look for what I call visual blobs. I'm looking for a dark spot, a spot that is kind of blobbed up naturally, whether it's a clump of vines, whether it's a root ball from a tree that's fallen over. If I'm looking for a spot for a ground blind, a fork in a tree makes a blob. And anyway, whatever that blob is going to be, that I try to become part of that blob. I try to figure out how to make myself part of that. Where if the deer's already used to going through there, they're used to having that in their peripheral anyway. And so it's not a big deal for them to, it wouldn't be a big deal for there to be a blob. But if you just all of a sudden put your stand on the side of a tree when there's never been a blob on the side of the tree, it's gonna jump out to them. And our deer down here are way more jumpy than the deer are anywhere else I've ever hunted. I've got trail camera videos of deer walking through the woods, looking up in the trees because they get shot at so much. Like no joke. That's not an exaggeration.
Right.
I can send you some videos. Like they'll walk through the woods looking up in the trees. And so you have to really pay attention to how you're going to shoot or set your stand up. So I do get a lot lower because of my equipment, because of my trad bow. I get a lot lower in the trees than normal. Normally I'm on average about 16 feet off the ground, 14 to 16, sometimes 18 feet off the ground. Sometimes I'm only, like I said, 11 to 12 feet off the ground. It just kind of depends on where the cover is.
Gotcha. That's interesting that there are setups that distinctively, specifically set up differently than you would with a different bow.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's a big difference.
Fascinating. Let's talk about your taxidermy business. So you've, in addition to being a hunter, a traditional hunter, and gone through lots and different phases of becoming a hunter, you also run a taxidermy business. So you're in this stuff 24/7. Tell me about your taxidermy business. How did you get into it? What drew you to that beyond just the field hunting and doing what you were doing?
Well, it was obviously, like I said, I grew up with an interest in deer and animals and all that. I've always been artistic. I draw, or I used to draw and paint and stuff like that in high school, all growing up. And I was always drawing deer and turkeys and ducks. And so I've always been interested in like wildlife art. But when I was in the 8th grade, I job shadowed a taxidermist that lived a few miles from where I grew up, and he'd mounted a duck for me. One of my first ducks. He mounted did a horn mount on my first deer, and anyway, so I job shadowed him, and when I was in there, I was like, man, this is kind of cool. Well, anyway, by the time I turned 15 and was looking for a job, I'd got my permit. I just happened to stop by and talk to the guy, and the guy was like, man, I'm actually needing to get some help. Would you be interested? And I was like, yeah, I'd be interested. And so I worked for another taxidermist for 7.5 years. I worked for him from the time, basically all the way through high school and all the way through college. I worked for a taxidermist. And I did some other odd stuff, in between, but the taxidermist was the consistent person that I was working for. And I prepped his hides. By the time I left, I was doing the detail, a lot of the airbrushing and epoxy work and stuff on the deer. I was doing a little bit of clay work, but the main thing I was doing was prepping his hides. Well, I have a marketing degree, and once I got my degree, I was like, well, I'm going to go out into the real world, and go use my degree. And so I quit working for him and went to work. I managed internet marketing campaigns for a while. Then I went from there, got into the oil field because cubicle life wasn't for me. And I'm not a computer. I can work with computers, but it's not something I want to do all day, every day. So I went into the oil field, and anyway, I worked myself up in the oil field from delivering supplies all the way to when I got out of the oil field. I was a technical inside salesman, so I would do regular inside sales stuff, but then I was doing a lot of analytical. Somebody call and give me their process conditions, and I would run calcs and tell them what type of valve they needed with the right trim, all that kind of good stuff. So I was in the oil field, but I started doing taxidermy on the side, just for myself and for friends and family several years back. And then when me and my wife started getting serious, and I was like, I'm fixing to have to spend some money on a ring and a house. I was like, I need to start pushing some taxidermy. So I started doing a little bit more taxidermy work to the point where I was doing 20 to 30 deer a year. Well, then my job in the oil field kind of got shaky and started going downhill. And so I decided to try advertise. I'd never advertised for my taxidermy work. So I made a Facebook page, Instagram page, and started posting pictures, had business cards made and had them delivered to or put them on, the local meat processors. And in my first year, I took in enough, which was 2 years ago, I took in enough work that first deer season for me to be able to quit my job. And at the end of this coming April, I will have been full-time taxidermy working for myself for a year. So it's been pretty awesome.
That's very cool. So it kind of brings it full circle. You get to kind of monitor what else is going on out there in the woods around you. And
yeah, there's a lot of reasons. One, I'm like I said, I like art. I'm very detail oriented. So making these animals, what they should be, is important to me. I have a lot of respect for mature whitetails. That's the one thing I would tell anybody if you're wanting to learn. Gain a respect for them. Don't treat them like it's a target. I'm not trying to get weird or anything like that. But don't gain a respect for them as you would a foe, like as you would a competitor. You're going to learn your competitor, like for a boxing situation, you're going to learn that person. You're going to learn how they move, how they think, what they do, their habits, what do they do in the ring? What do they do out of the ring? And have that same approach towards these animals, gain a respect for them where you're trying to figure them out. How do they think? How do they move? Where do they eat? Why do they do this? Why do they go to these places? And the best thing I could tell anybody, and I guess I should have said it, when you asked the previous question, is try to find one particular buck that you want to hunt and figure out that one buck. Because if you can figure out what one mature buck does in your area, you can figure out what a lot of mature bucks do in that area, because they're creatures of habit, especially the big older deer. If one buck is comfortable moving through a certain area in broad daylight, then any other buck that travels through that property is going to be comfortable traveling through that same area in broad daylight. Yeah. So if you can find out what one particular mature buck is doing, then set yourself up in that area and learn from it. So all of that kind of helped push me into this, because I have a genuine respect for these big animals, and I just want to make sure that proper respect is given. I hate seeing a big buck look like a sock puppet.
Right.
It kills me. Like bad taxidermy. I'm like, why would you do that to that deer? That's terrible. And anyway, so that's just I don't know. That's just how my brain works with it. But it's really neat getting to work with these animals every day.
Very, very cool. All right, now let's go into that memorable deer hunt that kind of brings this thing full circle. Like all the things you've learned, all the things you've accomplished over your hunting career and your professional aspects of life these days. Can you think of a memorable deer hunt that kind of brings it all together?
Yes, sir. It's anybody who knows me or has followed me or anything like that. Just about everybody knows about Jacob. And that's a buck that I hunted really, really hard. And that deer epitomizes everything that we've kind of discussed. The deer showed up on me one year in the summer, full velvet, really pretty buck. I hunted him hard. And it's a long story, so I'll try to make it a little bit brief. But
bring in some details, though. That's okay.
Yes. So the first year, I had him in the summer. He showed up like 4 or 5 times, and then he disappeared. And I was like, "Where is this deer at?" And I couldn't find him. He finally showed up the first week in November, and he was in a edge of a thicket, or there was a ridge that had a thicket that was connected to a big swamp bottom. And there was a scrape line kind of on that transition, and he kept hitting these scrapes. So that year I was trying to figure him out. And that year he was a mainframe 10 with a split G2 on the right, making him an 11. And at the time, I mean, he was a really nice buck, but he really wasn't. He did not appear to be really old. He's kind of a lanky deer. And even, as he got older, he stayed lanky. But that year he was like 138-inch deer, just a really respectable buck. And I actually, December 12th, the deer came in, and it was right at dark. He came in, checked the scrape that I was hunting, and I could see the deer, but I could not. It was late enough I couldn't see limbs. And I shot him. And when I shot, I knew something didn't quite sound right. And I looked, I couldn't find my arrow. I found blood. We blood trailed him like 200 yards. It started pouring down rain. And anyway, couldn't find the deer. And I had no clue where I hit. I just knew that there was blood on the ground and I couldn't find my arrow. And I was like, what have you done? You have messed up. And so I looked and looked and looked. 2 days later, the deer shows up on camera checking the same scrape 20 yards from where I shot him, from 2 days before. And he had a cut, a scab on the front of his hip. I had apparently hit a limb, and my arrow had deflected and stuck in his back leg. And the arrow wasn't there. He just had a hole. And so the deer started walking with a limp. Well, that's why I named him Jacob, because I thought of the story in the Bible where, Jacob wrestled with the angel, and the angel touched his hip and he started limping. And so I named him Jacob. Well, I stayed with him the whole rest of the year, and I never could kill him, never could catch up with him. And when he lost his velvet, it even got down, or when he lost his antlers, I had videos of him with, scabs on his head and a scab on his legs. So it was kind of cool. The following year, this is something I do in the summertime. If I'm trying to find a mature buck, I look for natural food sources. Baiting is legal here in Louisiana. So you have a lot of people putting out corn and all kinds of other stuff that people put out. But what I try to do is I try to find deer, especially early in the summer. I try to find deer that I try to find them where they like to be naturally. I don't like altering what a deer wants to do, because as soon as you get through altering it, the deer's going to move on. But if you figure out where the deer's what he's already doing, and then, you step in, then it doesn't matter what you're doing. The deer's going to be there regardless. So especially early summer or late summer, I try to find natural food sources. So there was an open area that was growing some marsh elder and some other browsing material that these deer were coming in there eating on, ragweed and such. And so I could tell that the tops of these plants are being nipped off, and I put up a camera. Well, this buck showed up on camera, and he had these big old Coke cans on his head. And I was like, man, that looks like Jacob. But I never could get a picture of his hip. Well, about a week later, I finally got pictures, and there was a dark spot back where I'd shot him. And I could tell he was going to be way bigger than what he was the year before. That was the year that Louisiana was in like national news for all the flooding that we had.
Right.
It was 2016, just crazy amounts of flood. And anyway, so this deer came in, and he started hanging out, and I was just trying to pick him apart. I put in multiple cameras in that area. I rely heavily on trail cameras, just because we don't have open areas where we can sit back and glass them, like a lot of people are able to. So I do my glassing with my trail cameras. I get into these thickets, try to figure out where the deer are, and I leave my cameras up and back out, and try to, figure them out that way. So throughout the summer, I was doing that, trying to figure out the details of this deer. And what I was doing is I was taking what that deer was doing that year, basing it against all of the patterns and pictures I had from him from the year before, and trying to figure out some sort of a movement pattern, areas he was liking to come from, where he was staying, where he was feeding. And so I was just really trying to pay a whole lot of attention to my trail cameras. And I leave most of my trail cameras on video, because it tells me more information. Instead of a deer just being in front of the camera, it tells me how the deer walks into the camera. So just because the deer's coming in from the left doesn't mean that he's walking directly in from the left. He might be coming in from an angle, and depending on where that transition is, that could be, if you're trying to back trail him, that could lead you into two completely different areas. So I leave my cameras on video because of that. So I was able to keep up with this deer all summer. And as the summer developed or went on, this deer developed into just a brute, just an insanely large animal for this area. Biggest deer I've had on camera. And so he wound up disappearing on me. September 4th, he shed his velvet, and I got pictures of him standing in front of my camera with velvet hanging off of his antlers. And that was the last picture I had of that deer. He disappeared on me for like 3.5 weeks, and I was freaking out. Part of the problem is we have, this is something we hadn't discussed, but we have a massive hog problem down here in Louisiana, and it affects your ability to pattern big bucks a lot of times. Yep. Deer in general don't seem to mind hogs, but I mean, they do, but it doesn't affect them as much as what it affects mature bucks. Mature bucks put up with a big group of hogs. When hogs move in, big bucks move out typically. Okay. And that's what happened. These hogs moved into this area, and the deer just disappeared. I'm like, where did this deer go? And anyway, September comes along. October 1st is coming up really quick. That's when our bow season starts. So 4 days before season, I'm like, this is the deer I've got that I'm hunting. I had some other respectable bucks on camera, but again, this is the biggest deer I'd ever seen. And I was putting every bit of effort I had into that deer. And so I hadn't seen him in 3.5 weeks, but based on everything that I had learned from the year before, and based on everything that I had watched him do throughout the summer, I made a game plan and kind of decided on where I wanted to hunt and hung a stand 4 days before season opened. So season actually opened on a Saturday that year. And so the Thursday before, I went in, did a little bit of scouting right then. And again, there was nothing. I had not had camera pictures of this deer in 3.5 weeks. There wasn't anything there other than there was a bottom, a cypress bottom, and there were some ridges. And I found where there was some oak trees that were dropping acorns early. And normally it was like season wasn't even open, and the oaks were dropping. And so I could tell there had been some deer in there eating, and there was one set of really big tracks. And it was kind of like if you were to draw circles over his rut activity from the year before and his summer activity from the year I was hunting, and where the circles overlapped was kind of where those oak trees were. And I was like, this kind of makes sense. And so I put a camera up and hung my stand. And when I went in Saturday morning to hunt, I pulled out my card, put it in the card reader, climbed the tree, strapped myself in, and sat down. And when I start flipping through the camera, that buck had showed up. He apparently had been down in that area in the edge of that thicket, and I hadn't been messing with that spot. But he showed up on camera in broad daylight the day before season opened. And I hadn't seen him in 3.5 weeks. I just, I hung the stand and the camera based on a gut feel from all the information I'd gathered, and it just, it worked out. I was right where I needed to be. And so 3 days go by. The wind was swirling really, really bad, and like it would be perfect. I'd go in, sit the stand. I'd be sitting in the stand, and the wind would swirl, and it was just I never could get a consistent wind, and it was driving me crazy because of the way the ridges and everything were, being on the edge of this flat bottom. And I had hogs come through. I had other deer come in, and it seemed like almost everything was spooking, and it was driving me crazy because I'm like, I'm about to mess up. This is not where I need to be. This is where I need to be, but the wind isn't working with me. And well, that was a Saturday. The following, I think it was Tuesday evening, I went and hunted, and I had a strong, consistent wind, and I slipped in, I hunted, and right before, about an hour before dark, that buck comes walking out of the cypress trees, and I managed to shoot him, and he scored 172 and was a 9-point, a mainframe 9 with a split G2 on his right, making him a 10. But just a phenomenal buck. I broke my 140-inch goal with the trad bow with him. So he was just, it was phenomenal, man. That deer, and I managed to get it all on film, and it was just, I don't know, that deer kind of changed a lot of stuff, or not changed. It kind of epitomized my journey, I guess, if you want to call it that, from, learning, finding a mature buck, trying to figure out a mature buck and sticking with that one deer and figuring out how he moves through your area. And I've done that. I've killed several really nice bucks doing it that way. It's not always my target buck that I kill. But again, when you are hunting like that, you're putting yourself in buck spots. So a lot of times I'm hunting low odds deer spots, but high odds buck spots, meaning that when I hunt, I might not see many deer, but the deer I see are more than likely going to be bucks. And so, I put myself in a situation where, it was really, really high chance the deer was going to show up, and he did. And it all worked out for me. But
that's a great illustration. Hunting the spots, you may not be seeing a lot of deer, but when you see a deer, it's likely going to be a buck. That's a great illustration. I love that. Very cool. Excellent. Great story. Definitely brought it all together.
Yes, sir.
And congratulations, by the way. That's a heck of a hunt. Really.
Thank you.
Really phenomenal. Very cool.
Yeah, he's pretty special to me.
Yeah, I can see why.
Right.
Okay. Let me hit you with 10 rapid fire questions here, and we'll call it a day. But these are just for personality things and some opinions.
Okay.
All right, what's your number one hunting tip of all time?
Watch the wind, pay attention to the wind and the details.
Gotcha. We all, not all of us, but some of us have these things that we kind of feel naked if we're hunting. We forgot that one thing at home or in the truck. What's that one thing for you?
In Louisiana, my thermocell.
Thermocell, yeah, I can appreciate that. Hunting in Maryland, I can appreciate that for sure. And early season New Hampshire, nobody knows this, but in New England, especially in some of the northern states, it becomes during certain parts of the year the most humid part of the country across the states. But you don't think of New England being a humid area. But,
no, not at all.
No, but in the summertime, there are times when it's the most humid part of the country, and believe me, I can understand humidity, especially early season, and mosquitoes, because they have a short lifespan here, but when they come strong.
Yeah, it's awful. I mean, literally, I was swatting mosquitoes on Christmas, and that's just. Like we hardly ever have a time where we don't have mosquitoes. It is super frustrating.
Right. That would frustrate. I don't like bugs generally, but
no,
that's the problem.
And it's not them biting me that drives me crazy as it is where it's right at dark when you're straining to hear every little thing. Cause I hunt with my ears a lot.
Yeah.
Because I hunt in really, really thick areas because of the trad bow. So I'm trying to make sure that everything is really close and really tight quarters. And I'm also really aggressive how I hunt. So I'm getting up in the middle of a thicket, whereas a lot of people will hang back, but I'll get right up in their bedroom. So I have to listen and hear the deer before it shows up on me because I have to be ready when it shows up. And right at dark or in that prime time, all you hear is like, oh, it drives me up the wall.
That's a great sound effect, by the way.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right.
I hear it enough. I better be able to do it good.
Right. Oh, that sound is just the one. Like it's almost as bad. I'd say it's worse actually for me. You know how sometimes a coyote pack will get howling and it kind of sends that chill up your spine. I get the same thing with that darn mosquito coming that close to your ear and just stop. Like he's somewhere here. I must kill him. But man, this is really screwing up my hunt.
And they're never where you think they are. When you hear that, you swat, and that noise never goes away.
Right, you're spot on. Absolutely. All right, so thermocell, I get it.
Thermocell.
What's your biggest pet peeve in life?
Wow, it's not what I was expecting at all. I guess a lack of respect. People having a lack of respect for each other.
That makes sense. Yep.
That bugs me, where you have people that are so full of themselves or arrogant, whatever you want to call them. They'll just want to steamroll, or what they say is more important, or what they say is right, and what you say is wrong, and that you can't talk to them otherwise. That mentality to where you don't show respect towards your fellow hunter, your fellow human, just because you might be the CEO of a company, you think you're better than anybody else, and titles don't matter. We're all people. We're all going to be in dirt one day. Anyway, that is that's a pet peeve of mine. Just people that have a lack of respect for their fellow humans, and that can be taken on a lot of levels.
That makes sense. All right, you're in your mid or late 30s these days.
Early 30s.
Early 30s. Okay, you're in early 30s. What would you tell a 16-year-old Harmon Carson, knowing what you know today?
Don't wait so long to get into traditional archery.
There you go. Right. Let's get that thing going a little earlier.
Right.
You're at a hunting convention somewhere in the world, and a stranger asks you what you do for a living. What would you tell him?
I'm a taxidermist. I capture people's experiences.
Very cool. What'd you have for breakfast this morning?
A bowl of cereal.
Wow. All right. All right. You can have your own billboard on the side of a highway. It's a blank canvas. You can put anything you want on it. What would it be?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
My initial thing is probably a lot more simplistic than what I would put. But Jesus loves you.
That's a common answer, actually. I can definitely see that.
You're here for a purpose.
Yep.
Like I said, I would word it in a way where you feel that Jesus loves you. It wouldn't be as simplistic as Jesus loves you, but
Right. No, I get it.
Like I said, you put me on the spot. I got to think about that.
I hear you. Good answer on for short notice there. All right. If I say the word successful to you, who's the first person that pops into your head and why?
Ooh, man, I don't know that. I actually didn't have anybody pop in my head.
All right. But we can move on. That is the answer.
There's a lot.
What's a typical day in your life look like?
So I get up, eat cereal, make some coffee, or eat breakfast, depending on what it is. Make coffee, and then normally go out to the shop and spend the bulk of the day working on whatever step of taxidermy work that I'm in the middle of. Work on that. Most of the time I actually work through lunch. I don't bother to eat lunch. I might grab a snack, and then, I'll work till 6 o'clock or so, and then come back to the house and eat dinner, hang out with my wife. And, if I'm lucky and have enough daylight, I might go hog hunting. So,
all right. That's very cool.
And that's actually a pretty common experience, around here. So I'm I guess blessed and cursed to be able to go hog hunting at will.
Right. I understand. All right. And then finally, what's a deer hunting day in your life look like?
Normally I'm running late. I'm scramble, get my stuff together, get to the woods, and try to slip in without a flashlight. Normally slip in as quiet as I can, get up the tree, and I hunt. Again, it depends on the day, the weather, what's going on, but I'll hunt till I'll hunt 2 to 3 hours early, unless the weather's right and I'm seeing deer, and I'll stay longer, but normally only 2 to 3 hours. And then I'll slip down and I'll scout as I work my way out of the woods. A lot of times my scouting will almost take as long as what my hunting does, but I'm moving really, really slow, so I'm not messing things up. That way I can figure out where I want to hunt that evening. And so I'll go out. I might come do some work in my shop. I might grab lunch. I might hang out at my parents', might shoot my bow. And then I'll go back that afternoon and try to slip in and hunt on the sign that I found while I was scouting on my way out.
Gotcha. All right. Very good. That's those are the 10 rapid fire questions. Very well done.
Awesome.
All right. Harmon, I got to say, it's been an absolute blast. I learned a lot about hunting in Louisiana, traditionally in the midst of the thicket and the mosquitoes, and putting it all together. I mean, I think you've really had an incredible journey in life with your father teaching you where you were or how to get started, and then you progressively getting to the point where you're honing your craft so to the point that traditional archery is the only method that you're basically using today. Phenomenal story, great deer hunting strategies, and I appreciate you sharing those tips and strategies on the podcast here for everybody to hear, and hopefully they can plug some of your techniques into their ways of life as well.
Yes, I hope so.
Excellent, man. Well, I appreciate it, and we'll stay in touch, and I'll watch you from afar from Facebook and social media.
I appreciate it. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
You can just tell when you're talking to a hunter that's authentic. Harmon Carson is definitely one of those guys. I mean, he learned to hunt in the woods by his dad just dropping him off and saying, okay, make sure you shoot the deer that comes by. But you had to figure out a lot of stuff in that lesson. Basically had to figure it out on your own, trial and error. Yeah, you had a parent kind of watching over you to help you in and out of the woods, but after that, it's lesson by lesson, slowly. And now Harmon is just a fantastic bow hunter to the point where he doesn't want to use a gun anymore. He doesn't want to use even a compound bow anymore. It doesn't matter to him. And again, it goes back to if you learn how to hunt, the weapon you choose becomes irrelevant. It's quite a compliment to his success in the field. Dusty, where can we find you when you're not hanging out here in the studios with me?
Shoot me an email, dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. You can look me up on Instagram and Twitter @ChasingAntler, Facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. Jay, where can the people reach out to you when you're not on the mic?
Likewise, you can shoot me an email, jay@bigbuckregistry.com, and you can visit us on Facebook, facebook.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Twitter, which is twitter.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Instagram, instagram.com/bigbuckregistry, and YouTube, which is youtube.com/bigbuckregistry. On YouTube, you can listen to all of our podcasts in their entirety. As far as videos are concerned, it's a boring video, but the audio content is there, so you can actually listen to our podcast. You can also listen to all of our live shows that we've done on Thursday nights when we do them, and we've gone back and re-interviewed a lot of our previous guests we had on the show just to put a face to a voice, let's put it that way. You can always listen to our show on other places as well, not just YouTube. We're found on Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play, and as an Amazon Alexa skill. Go to Alexa and say, Alexa, enable Big Buck Registry. And if you would like to submit a buck to our page for consideration and be featured on our page in front of 250,000 diehard deer hunting fans, all you have to do is go to bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck, and all of the instructions will be right there. I think that's pretty much everywhere we're at. I think that's a wrap, Dusty.
That's a whole lot of big buck, Jay.
Sure is. I'm Jay Scott.
I'm Dusty Phillips.
And this is the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. We'll see you next week.